Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the June 24th meeting of the Development Finance Committee of the Housing Opportunities Commission. I'm Jackie Simon, the chair, and with me is Commissioner Wilson. And on the internet is Commissioner Merkowitz. Our senior.
Howdy.
Our first action of the morning is the approval of the minutes of our meeting of May 27th. They have been circulated. May I have a motion?
I move approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. The minutes are approved. Thank you, Patrice. The first action item before us is the approval of a new participating lender in our single-family mortgage purchase program. Corinne, are you going to be?
Paulette Dudley will be presenting that item.
Right.
Paulette?
Yes, thank you so much. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
This is for the single-family lending, the approval of new participating lenders. The commission, approves continuous participation of lenders in our program, and this is one of those items.
We're having technical difficulties.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Hold on just a minute, Paulette.
Thank you. Okay. No.
Sorry for the interruption.
That's okay. Are we ready?
I think we're back on. If we have speech now.
Okay, thank you. So the lender that is seeking our approval is Celebrity Home Loans, and they have merged with Apex Home Loans, who is a participating lender in our program currently and have been very active in our program for several years. They also teach the MPDU classes, etc. But as a result of the merger back in December, which will become effective as of June 30th, they do have to also become a participating lender. So they will be absorbing Apex. So at this time, they have applied also to the Maryland CDA program and also to the Virginia Housing Development program as well, because Apex is also an active participating lender in those particular home ownership programs. So we're seeking the approval of Celebrity to this absorbing Apex to become a participating lender in our program, so that there is no gap in the services of Apex going into the mortgage purchase program.
And just to be clear, Paulette, there's no net new number of approved lenders. This would just be a sort of a one-for-one replacement. It's the same lender essentially.
Yeah. It says absolutely. Yep. Because Apex's name will drop off the list and their name will go on.
That's great. May I have a motion?
I move approval that we join staff's recommendation to approve Celebrity Homes for participation in the single-family purchase program and send it forward to the commission.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
We are unanimous, and it's nice that we're able to keep them on board since they've been active participants.
Yes, they have. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Our next meeting is our motion and study and consideration is of HOC at Wheaton Gateway and approval and selection of an architect, civil engineer, and an amended pre-development budget and funding. And I take it that Marcus, you and Zach are going to be going through this with us.
Yes, is my audio coming through?
Thank you.
Audio. Okay. Okay. Yes, so it's for the record, Marcus Irvin, Director of Real Estate, HOC, joined with Zach Marks. And then we also have Dejana Donahue, Project Manager, joining us remotely to present this. All right, morning, Commissioners. So in 27, we're here to present Wheaton Gateway, a whole host of items, including 2 procurement-related matters, selection of an architect, civil engineer, and then also revised pre-development budget. On slide 3 gives you the top-down aerial view of the assemblage. We're going to be discussing Beers Mill West as part of Wheaton Gateway, which includes the Lindsay Ford parcels, the Ambassador Mattress Firm, small pocket park. Also shown on slide 3 is Beers Mill East, which is not a component of this development.
Thank you. Whoever's controlling the screen.
Oh, okay.
Okay, go ahead. I think it's useful because people outside are looking at this and don't have the familiarity we have and the benefit of this, to the extent that you can describe where things are physically and geographically on some of these, particularly when we've got a site as big as this one.
Yes.
So if you would do that, I'd appreciate it.
Definitely. So if you're looking at the aerial shown here on slide 3, we're at the intersection of University Boulevard, Beers Mill Road, just a couple hundred yards from Westfield Wheaton, and also the 10-story Westfield headquarters. So previously in the purple was the formerly owned HOC Ambassador Apartments, which had a retail component, of which Wilco, the other partner in the venture, had the commercial condominium. And then also at the corner was a former Mattress Firm parcel. So part of the original acquisition back in January of 19 was the acquisition of what you see highlighted in red, which was Beers Mill East, which is currently has a used car storage lot, not part of this development. And that's adjacent to the water towers. Beers Mill West, which encompasses this development effort, has the larger Lindsay Ford car dealership. You'll see a pocket park along East Avenue towards the rear of the site. Smaller sort of park right there at the intersection. And then adjacent to the McDonald's where there's a retaining wall is the former Ambassador Wilco piece.
And could you indicate the location related to, or how far away the metro stop is?
Yeah, so the metro stop would be if you're traveling, I guess, south down Beers Mill towards 495. Probably less than, I'd say it's about a 10-minute walk from the site as you're going downhill towards the county office headquarters, Westfield, Wheaton, and then also the metro station down there.
Thank you.
So just gives you an idea. I think what we'll do is in the future presentation, we can show a aerial and maybe just do a radius that shows you the proximity in terms of walking to metro.
I think that would be helpful.
We do have transit right at our front door, including buses that'll go down University, also to Beers Mill, and then there'll also be a future BRT stop right at the front of the development.
Wonderful.
Next slide, please. So we just broke this up into two slides. Once again, in January of 19, that was the full acquisition of the site. On November of 2019, this was also where we engaged in the larger partnership aspect with Duffy, PS Ventures, and then also Wilco. So in summary, while the plans are being developed, subject to approval by members of the venture, the opportunity to transfer this gateway site will greatly contribute to the overall Wheaton economy and life. It's been a multi-year effort since that acquisition, so we're really bringing things forward and giving not only yourself, but the public and education on what the development program consists of. Let's go to the next slide. So slide 5 just beautifully illustrates all the milestones since 2017 up through today. Largely, since I've been here at HOC, it was acquiring the properties, the parcel aggregation. Also in 2020, we came to you for concept plan approval, which was submitted. 2021, the big milestone there was submission of the sketch plan. And then there was also the revised sketch plan, which has been approved by Montgomery County. So now in 2022, we're bringing the procurement efforts forward, and then also development program. Sketch plan has been approved, and we're now bringing forth the effort to advance the pre-development efforts over the next several years. One thing I'll add here, you'll see this slide in all future presentations, but it's the triple bottom line. Essentially, we think this is a good graphic that shows the intersection of planet, profit, and people. There isn't a separate slide, but we've had several discussions about it. Included in the people is the universal design aspects, also design for life, which where appropriate and where feasible, we'll look to incorporate those into the Wheaton Gateway development, both at the exterior and interior of the site. So it's not a specific site, but it's embodied in this illustration on the triple bottom line. Also, you hear us talk about various levels of sustainability. So Passive House is a target along with Energy Star and LEED, which was a requirement of the respondents to the architectural RFP. So this very much aligns with what you'll see in Hillendale Gateway, also Garnkirk, and then also our renovation projects as well.
Great progress.
This one is very wordy, but essentially a lot of this also aligns the approach to sustainability with the county's climate action plan. So you will see that there's a push for high performance buildings throughout the county, which not only benefits HOC as a long-term owner and landlord, but also the future residents as well. Dejan is on. I'm going to kick it off to her. Slide 8 will show you 3 different sections and 2 phases of the project. What we'll do is we'll walk you through the overall development program and then the 2 phases of those components, which is part of the ask today for procurement along with the pre-development budget. So at a very top-down level, it's 770 plus or minus units with a 30% site-wide affordability target. We talked about the sustainability efforts, including LEED for Homes Platinum, Energy Star Multifamily, and then also Passive House target. Dejan, if you're on, I'm going to kick it off to you to take us forward on the multi-phase, 2-phase, 3-section approach. If you're ready.
Before you do that, you say 30% site-wide affordability. Do you have tentative affordability per phase?
We haven't got to that level of detail, but as we design the buildings, and you'll see the massing program, we will take sort of the same approach that we did at Hillendale. And once the plans are more developed, we'll be able to identify which building will have what level of target. But right now, it's 30% affordable, 30% site-wide.
And I would just add to that each building will have at least 30% in it. So maybe another way to describe this is that 30% is really the floor. And so, in particular,
if you're going to go back to Hillendale, that's where,
Yeah.
I know where we started, and I know where you took us. So we remember. Yes. So it's the same idea here. That it would be 30% at least in each phase, given that the section to the is that blue? Mm-hmm. The blue building is likely to be a senior building. There could be elevated affordability there, for instance.
I think in future ones, we ought to, in fact, include the minimum 30% and minimum 30% each building.
Yeah.
And may I make one other request, and that is we're using phrases now that are not necessarily understood or the general public have not been exposed to. So it would be useful for you to identify what a passive house target means and its benefits, just so that this language becomes more universally understood. Since we've got a much bigger audience now than we've had in the past, and more people are able to access our meetings.
Absolutely right.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Dejana, if you want to jump in, I'll start with slide 8 if there's anything you want to add to that. Otherwise, we can go through the programming massing on slide 9.
Yep, I'm on, Marcus. Good morning, everyone. This is Dejana Donahue, project manager, as Marcus indicated at the beginning of this. Before we jump to slide 9, I also wanted to emphasize, if we could just go back one slide, that for this particular meeting, the pre-development budget is representative of the entitlement phases for phase 1 and 2, and that includes the 770 units that Marcus stated earlier in that first section with the red and purple. And then for phase 2, that is indicative of the design and construction documentation services for section for phase 1 and sections 1 and 2. So this will be discussed further in the presentation, but this is the first of us to start to delineate the differences between the entitlement and what we're procuring for design and permit phases.
Next slide.
Next slide. Okay, this identifies the massing of those 3 sections. From here, this perspective is taken from University Boulevard and East Avenue to give you a sense of the scale of the project. Section 1 being high rise, section 2 mid rise, and section 3 high rise as well. Here we also reiterate the number of units that we're approximately projecting and the total number of retail square footage.
Also note, just as we're going through these slides, important for the public and then also yourselves, that these are massing diagrams. They're subject to further design and development. So it's really just a physical box, a hollow box rather, that shows the relation of the project site to adjacent structures. So when we actually get to laying out the floor plans, this will be much more developed. But if you see elements such as white rectangular boxes that may represent a balcony, this is really at the level of design that we're at. So it's not meant to be a final color, final palette, but just to show the program uses.
Yes.
Thanks.
Referring to Commissioner Simon's comment, you just point out that Weir's Mill is to the north at the top of that picture, and that building to the right is Wheaton North, just for people who are familiar with the neighborhood.
Okay. Yeah, we'll highlight the major anchors and also the streets for the final.
Right.
That'd be great. Wonderful. We're making progress.
John, I guess we can go to
Next slide.
Yeah, slide 10.
And the next slide also gives you a different perspective as we were talking about orienting us in the relationship and in the fabric of where we're proposing this development. And here, this is from East Avenue. So Veros Mill Road is behind the 2 larger section 1 and 3 massings, and then section 2 is in the forefront. Next slide.
Oh, or one other thing, and as I'm looking at this, can we go back to the last slide? One slide back. Yeah, slide 20. So this actually gives a better representation of just the proximity to transit. So let's see, you can see where the high rise and I think the Exchange, where the Safeway is located. So we'll use this opportunity on this map to point out proximity to transit. And then also Westfield Wheaton, which you can see just off to just below that box, highlighting section 3. So we'll use this opportunity to describe proximity to transit as well. All right, next slide, 11.
This old picture doesn't show the parking planning.
Correct. We're gonna get some updated areas.
This slide shows the site circulation here, and it provides still a massing of that ground level, but also provides a bit more of a plan view for perspective, showing Veros Mill Road at the top, and then branching from there, showing the primary site circulation in regards to parking and vehicular traffic, as well as the connection across the parcels from the phase 1, phase 2 project. You also have ingress and egress, the complexity of the site also onto East Avenue as well. So numerous opportunities for site access and vehicular access. Next slide. This is a true plan view of that ground level that we were looking at on the prior slide. This slide emphasizes the different programmatic elements on that ground level and delineates them with a color code showing commercial in orange, amenity spaces in blue. The yellow, I'm trying to make out, looks like the artist lofts and some supporting building elements in the gray. You can see some of the parking spaces here from the plan view, and there's circulation connecting across those two parcels, and then the units as well on along East Avenue. Next slide.
Is what an artist's loft is?
You hear that, John? She's asking for an artist loft. Essentially, it's a live work unit. I'd say probably one of the best, or one of a very good example would be in Hyattsville. EYA had actually developed a project just south of University of Maryland where you have almost like a live work unit where the artist may have a flat and then somewhat of a half or second story. So really encourage some activation at the street.
Is that like the stuff they did at when they converted the 3D police station? Exactly. They when art space did that, they did some artists lofts.
Yeah, also in Mount Rainier.
Right, in Mount Rainier with the art space also.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Great, thank you.
Yes, and on further detail in regards to program, this slide also shows section 1, the larger building in phase 1 that has the various spaces on the ground level, indicating retail, amenity spaces, the artist lofts that Marcus just went into further clarification on, and showing the residential units above that in regards to the relationship there on the site and some of the core building elements transcending through as well. Next slide. This is the smaller building of phase 1, section 2. This one is along East Avenue, and here when we were showing some of those aerial views, you saw that this part of the site along East Avenue has a smaller scale, and so to be sensitive to that with the existing neighborhood and the residences and the residential homes, this allows for a smaller scale and then provides a setback, which then increases the density. Next slide. This is another view of that same street access. Yes.
Oh, sorry, Commissioner Nelson has a question.
This is the senior building, correct?
Oh.
Yes.
And where's the primary entrance? I mean, I'm seeing a bunch of steps here.
Yeah, so to that point, we'll if we were to go to slide 11 where we show that circulation, there would be access in the lobby off of that main residential spine. So we go to slide 11, please. And we'll correct this for the bond. No, let's go back.
Together direction.
Yeah, let's go back to, keep going back. Back. Jump about maybe 4 slides back.
21.
Thanks, Cameron. Slide 21, please. There we go. So as I'm looking at this, we'll include maybe an arrow, something that signifies where the main building entrance would be for the elements. But for the senior building where it says underground parking structure, that's where that phase is located. So along that residential spine where you see the red arrows going from Beers Mill down to East Avenue, there'd be an accessible entrance as you're going down the hill towards east to access that building. So the door steps along East Avenue is another exit, but due to site challenges, we're going to look and see how we can make that a little bit more accessible there. But that's due to the grades where we're showing the stairs.
No, I gathered that. Well, I think we ought to look and see if there's a way for us to make it a little bit more accessible. Because if you've not seen, if you don't have a car, they just might want to go out to, you know, and then want to go all the way to that street that goes from University to so anyway, let's just look at that.
Thank you. All right, I think we were on slide 25. Yep. All right, Dejan.
Yes. Okay, we are on the same section in regards to section 2 with sensitivity to the topography that we will explore accessible route and options. This is showing section 2 before, and then the next slide shows the massing and position from another perspective, again addressing that setback in regards to scale of the existing neighborhood and then increasing density. Next slide. And this is phase 2, section 3. This is the building across the parcel that we showed through that site circulation, connecting those two and bridging those two buildings in the various phases of phase 1 and 2. And here, this building is similar in scale to section 1 in regards to high rise, 13 stories, and then the various elements on the ground level to activate the site in regards to retail and amenity spaces, and then showing some of those core building elements, again, transcending above and connecting to the residential units.
I observed the large spaces of blank walls. And I hope this will be an opportunity to use some art or something to warm those blank walls up in some way so they're a little more attractive.
Yeah, so definitely along the park garage, there's architectural possibilities to do like vertical fins, ways so that it doesn't just look like a parking structure, but is rather an element of the development. And I think the proximity to the cultural arts and just Wheaton as a whole, we can achieve that. So
I think that'll be great, a great asset to the community, and I think enjoyable to our residents. So.
But isn't it true that a lot of this, what we see is we add solid coloring on windows for the residential use?
Right. Yeah, the windows haven't been placed yet.
They haven't been placed.
Okay.
So it's not all going to be open.
yeah, there's it's going to be a great level of development before we get to the level that you're seeing.
When we can see the architectural drawings, it's going to be much more inviting, because this just addresses the bulk. I understand that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Next slide. And this slide shows a comparison of the construction technologies and really speaks to the sustainability slide that we had earlier in the packet to address some of the sustainability targets and goals for the project. Here we are showing the benefits and of the various elements in regards to stick frame, which has a low carbon footprint, as well as it's generally easy to construct, not a lot of experience in regards to labor. However, you are limited to 5 stories above a podium and does not specifically address the scale of section 1 and section 3, and quite frankly, section 2, with it being 6 stories. Mass timber, this derives from wood elements similar to stick frame, has a lower carbon footprint, and has the same advantages in regards to assembly. However, with the level of engineering in the mass timber elements, this allows for higher height. This is a newer technology that has been incorporated into Montgomery County Code as of 2021, and also has some aesthetic qualities to in regards to warming up the building, inviting the building, creating that level of appeal. Mid-weight steel prescient. This is historically more affordable than concrete, has some prefabrication elements as well. BIM clash technologies, which is also great for construction and anticipating any sort of obstacles in regards to the various building systems, and is less susceptible to water, mildew, rot, and etc. Another advantage to the mid-weight steel is the non-combustible element to it. And lastly, concrete here, very durable. We can get taller elements with this type of construction as well, less susceptible to water, mold, mildew, rot. And one of the disadvantages with concrete, however, is the high amount of embodied carbon and embodied energy derived from the construction. But it does have I'm sorry.
This chart has been very instructional to me. And I think it helps people understand the pluses and minuses we have to weigh when we look at how we're proceeding and developing, what tools we're using, the limitation of maybe labor needing more experience with the product or a material, which is a challenge, and yet affordability or safety and sustainability. And whoever developed this was attacking and addressing the way my mind functions on how we look at the decisions that we make as we're looking forward to the projects that we're undertaking in the breadth of them.
It will, also note with Design for Life and Universal Design, there's also ways in which we can also illustrate that. So this would, if you think of it as a menu, this gives you the menu of options that when Dejana gets into the architectural selection, that design teams are going to explore, which system is appropriate for the project. But then also in Universal Design, as you know, there's a whole host of menu options from hallways to exterior elements that could also be articulated. So great on the education component.
So are you saying that the architects help to determine the kind of system that we use?
It's a collaborative effort. So as we get into the design process, we'll see which system, in terms of the height, final unit counts, distribution, which system is going to be appropriate for them.
So we don't normally make that determination prior to hiring an architect.
We have an idea of which concept is going to work, but part of the exploration is just seeing with the local code, sustainability, which one will be the final determinant.
And do the, I'll get to this question later, do the different technologies affect the pricing of architectural services?
Not necessarily, but it also depends on when you make that decision and if you have to revert to something else. So as best we can, we'll control that during the design process.
And just to sort of add, in the past, it was, you really would go into a project knowing precisely the system because you were generally choosing between 3 systems, and it was really a system that it was really the system depending upon the height of the building you intended to build. And so in the past, you pretty much knew if you were only going to build 5 stories, you were building in stick. If you're going to build, to 9 stories, you're building in steel and beyond. But as you can see on this sort of menu slide, there are 2 new entrants that have greatly changed the decision-making process. 2 of the things that led us to these kinds of explorations were, one, concerns around combustibility. Wood frame is combustible, stick frame is combustible, whereas mass timber, steel in particular, and concrete in particular are highly resistant to that. So that's important. And then the second thing is that, the MPDU height and density bonuses that Montgomery County affords have been around for a long time. And one of the problems with taking advantage of them in the past have been, you get all these extra units, but they're all going to be more expensive if you try to actually build them because you're going to go from stick frame cheaper to concrete. And what the prescient and similar steel systems have begun to do, and mass timber in particular, are allowing us to achieve those extra units, which obviously is crucial to everything we're trying to do, in a way that's more cost competitive. And so it starts to get, so it's certainly there's a lot more thought that goes into these decisions these days than in the past, where it really was sort of automatic.
And this then, to follow the logic, is going to offer a lot more opportunity to builders and developers to achieve the MPDU densities that they've been denied or haven't been able to achieve in the past, which has been one of the major criticisms of the MPDUs, is that, yes, we've got these density bonuses, but we can't access them because there aren't the materials and there isn't the labor to even know about these. They haven't been code approved until recently and so forth. So I think that, to me, shows a great opportunity for the building industry to begin to recognize that there are now options to achieve their bonuses, and they'll have some cost in retraining labor, but they can make the economics work much more effectively.
Right, and the other pieces here, mass timber is something that's been used in Europe for a long time. We tend to, in the US, kind of pretend like the rest of the world hasn't actually done things for a long time. So, while it's sort of a new to us as opposed to new to the human race kind of thing. But the other thing that's obviously become crucially important, and that the commission is frankly led on in the county, is in terms of environmental responsibility, the climate, the county's climate action plan. And so what's also true is that building tall and dense is in itself environmentally responsible. And beyond that, the reason we're continuing to explore systems like mass timber is that mass timber has a much lower embodied carbon, which is sort of referenced here. And so it's just the next natural step in frankly taking a leadership role and showing the building community and the development community that these things can be done and can be done economically. And certainly given that HOC is always going to do its affordable component. So it's a shame to have to leave, the bonus on the table, which is also, also works against just plain old housing production goals. But for the private sector, which is more and more doing increased MPDUs because of things like the impact fee waiver and so forth, where they're doing 25% affordable, and they are also, generally speaking, not building the extra density. And these systems, when they start to see that, hey, these systems can actually bear fruit in that way, we think they'll borrow some of these ideas.
Well, that's really exciting, because with the cost of materials and the cost of construction and the economy, the way it's been going, the pressure on price increases for the MPDU program and so forth, those pressures are pushing them out of the range of affordability for the income level, targeted income level. So this is really exciting.
How much do you see the private industry taking advantage of this? Because I think one of the problems we've had in the past, and I think but also Pike and Road are examples, where they have not built to the maximum, even though they've tried to increase the number of housing around metro stuff. But they haven't built to the max because of the cost of going up. So one, are they beginning to take advantage of it? And two, I guess, is it almost too late to get taken? Heat stuff is already up.
Yeah, certainly we're definitely in this, in the same way that like in the early 2000s, you had sort of the advent of LEED, and there were a bunch, everything that was built before wasn't LEED, and then stuff was built, it was LEED. And you either own one of the old, generation buildings, or you own one of the new generation buildings. It's sort of almost like, this is almost more like the curve related to trying to have a computer that, you buy a new computer and it's 10 times more powerful than the one you bought 5 years ago. We're starting to really get more and more into that phase. And what we are seeing is that there are two things that are leading developers to do these things more and more in the private sector. And One is frankly things like legislation. Both the county and the state have recently passed, pretty ambitious building environmental responsibility laws that are going to require even buildings that already exist, to achieve certain standards, or else they're going to start receiving fines and setting goals in terms of an aggregate net zero for the state and so on. And so part of it is going to be that the economics of not building in this stuff get changed by just flat out, fees and other things, disincentives to staying. But the other thing is what we just typically see is that the West Coast is, if you want a crystal ball, we just sort of look at what the West Coast is doing. First we laugh at them and then we build like them. It just always seems to be the way, right? We say, oh, those silly Californians and their miles per gallon standards, and then they're all driving hybrids, but it's almost 10 years later. And so I think, we're seeing all of these technologies are being used and have been used for years in California and the Pacific Northwest. And really the hurdle tends to be, do you have the development consultants in place? So when we started Hillendale, we didn't have necessarily area architects that could deal with things like the prescient system that were necessarily doing a lot of projects that were passive house. And even between then and now, that's changed. And so but one of the ways in which HOC's leadership in this space is helpful is that it gives people stuff to work on in this area to where they get a chance to, it lowers the threshold for area consultants to begin to add staff and add experience. So now, as an example, Tortialis, when we started on Hillendale, it wasn't an in-house competency for them. And now they have certified architects on staff when it comes to things like passive house. So and most of that is just the trend of where things are going, but certainly it doesn't hurt that HOCs want to go out there and demonstrate some of these things. And so it's not just successful in terms of building buildings that are healthier for people, but giving the area that economic development jolt to be ready for what's clearly coming, whether folks like it or not. The laws are here in terms of what compliance is going to look like in the future in building performance.
And I think too, it's true of the products that go into these homes, where things the computers were much more expensive earlier on, and as they became more universally available and used, the prices came down. And I think it's true of many of the products, particularly accessibility and safety products that were luxury items and with high costs, as opposed to the institutional looking and appearing products. I think one of the most graphic ones is grab bars. They were all just steel things and nobody liked the looks of them. And all of a sudden now there are these beautiful, exotic combination, everything from toilet holders and grab bars to towel bars and so forth and so on. So I just think we're on the upward path of some really exciting, very exciting.
Yeah, it's really, if the demand is, that's really the key. It's creating the demand for those products. And once companies who produce those products know the demand is there, they're going to invest in research and development around these things. And so, passive house, in achieving passive house, the HVAC systems we're using are not expensive and not complicated. They're actually simpler and actually easier to maintenance in a lot of cases. And so it doesn't even necessarily mean that they won't stay expensive, because these companies will invest in figuring out systems that are simpler and that are more affordable, so that that idea that there's a premium to do this stuff, a major premium to do this stuff.
More usable as well.
More usable as well. Yep.
Exciting times.
All right, Dejana, we're at slide 29.
Okay, yes. And we are now pivoting to the procurement portions of this packet. Specifically, this slide addresses the selection of an architect and the criteria outlined for that selection. RFP 2311 was issued for architectural services for Wheaton Gateway on February 23rd, 2022, with a due date of April 8th, 2022. The RFP was posted, and here we would like to emphasize this, to HOC's website and distributed to more than 300 vendors registered in the Montgomery County Central Vendor Registration System. And also in that same process, procurement does have a system that notifies specific firms eligible and applicable to respond to the specific solicitations through that system to then be privy to the solicitation, which is also available on HOC's website. The RFP also included a pre-proposal meeting and conference, which was held on March 4th, 2022. 12 firms were in attendance at the pre-bid conference. We also want to state that although we have attendees at the pre-bid conference, there is no indication to confirm or share whether firms will respond to the solicitation. The scope of work outlined for RFP 2311 included 6 months of site plan preparation, 9 months of entitlement phase services, 6 months of construction document preparation, a permitting phase, followed by a construction phase services, including construction administration and construction observation. The scoring team received written instructions prior to scoring and currently consists of staff from risk management, asset management, real estate divisions, as well as a Duffy and Wilco representatives, all comprising of the scoring team, which reviewed the responses on May 25th of 2022. We'd also like to note that we did reach out to some of the attendees at the pre-bid conference who we were able to get in contact with, and they stated that due to lack of capacity, they did not respond to the solicitation. The proposals were scored on the following 4 evaluation criteria. The maximum points a proposal could receive is 100. The first criteria was qualifications, which provided a total of 50 maximum points. This included the demonstration of experience with projects in high rise, mixed use, and residential. Also energy standards beyond code. As we talked, this project is rigorously targeting specific energy standards and performance construction standards and certifications, in addition to experience with low-income housing tax credit, showing successful track record for light tech projects, and experience on light tech projects in the state of Maryland. The second criteria, additional MFD participation, allowed for a total of 15 points. This criteria was broken down into 2 areas. The first, which included a total of 5 points, was for the architect that allowed for direct MFD efforts specifically, and all firms were eligible to receive the 5 points for direct MFD efforts. The second criteria, which allowed for a total of 10 points, addressed the subcontracting plan. This relates to the procurement requirement of 25% minimum for MFD participation. Any respondent that scored and met that requirement would receive 0 in their scoring evaluation. Any respondent that provided MFD subcontracting plan for 25 to 29% would receive 6 points, and 30% or above would receive the full 10 points in that area. And with that, totaled to 15 points for additional MFD participation.
I have a question about that. I'm not understanding this. What is direct MFD?
Direct MFD specifically speaks to the architect's efforts. So for the two areas, the first direct MFD is the architect's efforts to employ MFD personnel for within the firm. And that extent could be met with various approaches in regards to their commitment to MFD personnel, their exposure to different institutions and universities that they would have identified in their specific proposals and how they would address that. And this differs from the second area, which is the subcontracting plan, because the subcontracting plan outlines different consultants that would be certified MFD firms as well.
But, so if I'm a certified MFD firm, I don't automatically get the 5 points.
You do.
Okay, that's fine. Now on the second one, there's nothing in the RFP that requires subcontract. So this assumes that you're going to subcontract. And I guess if you've got a small firm that does more stuff in-house as opposed to subcontracting, they are penalized by this. Is that correct? I mean, I don't, that's where I'm a little bit confused. And then you made a statement that if you're an MFD certified, you get those 10 points. I'm not sure where that was said in here.
Okay, for clarification, the first area, the 5%, the 5 points, is the architect's direct MFD efforts. That's in regards to the architect's efforts to acquire and obtain MFD personnel. And as stated, any firms that are also an MFD certified firm would be eligible for the 5 points for that area.
Right.
The second,
I'm sorry. You're talking about the efforts they will make prospectively, not what they are bringing to the table at that point in time. Is that what we're trying to do? Is to urge them to increase hiring efforts or to measure what they are bringing to the table at the time that they submit their proposal? In other words, is it their accomplishment and we're motivating that to continue to grow, or are we hoping that they're going to follow through on aggressive recruiting and inclusion efforts?
based on the language in the RFP, the intent for the direct MFD efforts is in regards to projection for acquiring MFD personnel.
And what if they don't fulfill those and meet those projections? How are we following through on, and how does it affect the next time that a particular contractor or profession submits an application to us? Do we look at, they didn't achieve the goals the last time, or they didn't follow through on the efforts, and so they're going to be ranked lower? You're going to take points away? To me, it's a very complicated system.
Yeah, there's two, so yeah, both I think both critical points. So one, the idea is that this is who would be staffed to the project. So it's not just simply like, you know, you'll do these things in general as part of your firm while you're working on our projects. The idea is that they already have the requisite employees in firm that are going to be working on this project, or that as part of working on this project. You know, that's what the staffing is going to look like. That's what they're going to bring to the table. So as opposed to, we'll check with you in a couple of years and see if you met your goal. This is much more about what are you going to show up with at the table as a part of this contract award. So that's the first part. The second piece that we can certainly do is we can include more information in the revised packet that talks about talk specifically, and we want to work with obviously Darcel and her team to make sure with compliance, to make sure that we've got it all right. But obviously there would be, there need to be consequences. There would be consequences for not, we're awarding based on scoring, based on a commitment from these firms. They didn't, for some reason, meet these commitments. Obviously, there would, we would need to be in position to enforce and to, and there would need to be transparently understood consequences.
And then it would also be calculated in the future based on the qualification, the points we apply or grant on qualifications the next time they came with a response.
Yeah, and again, not wanting to speak for Darcel, but I think generally we would also want to be able to, have some sort of, record. It'd be like looking at a past default or something like that. And then in terms of why we structured it this way, what we're trying to do is balance some of the conversations that we've had in the past around certainly wanting to provide additional opportunity for MFD certified firms. That's first and foremost, but also making sure that the commission's getting a robust response, that we're getting enough competitors in, that we're getting a good slate from which to choose. And lastly, frankly, to motivate those architecture firms that either just by virtue of who their principals are, can't necessarily certify as a firm. But we think it's still an achievement to encourage these firms by working with us to, to add teammates, who can be the future leaders of those firms. One of the hardest things we've found, and which is not to say there's not more we can do, there's always more we can do, but one of the biggest challenges is even getting certified MFD firms to come in the door in the first place. And again, that's not a criticism of the marketplace. That's stuff that we have to continue to strive to do, is to make sure these firms are coming through the door. And so there are things we can do, but long term, the most important thing we think we can do is to create as many opportunities for the future leaders, or for people that may ultimately leave, a storied firm like Torty Gallus and go start their own firm once they've had the experience of working at a class firm like Torty Gallus. So we wanted to create a sliding scale here where the 15 points weren't simply doing one thing. They're achieving a number of different things and achieving it in a sliding scale, so that we know that there could be concerns that what's the right number in that column that takes a firm that may not be actually prepared to do this job and puts them in the driver's seat for that job. So, but at the same time, you can't get good at something until you do it. So we wanted to create kind of a sliding scale that allowed us to have a little bit more of a sensitivity to those decisions.
Another question that I have is, take a very large firm, and I don't know whether Torty fits that definition or not, but let's assume we have a large firm that is not MFD. Maybe they get the 5 points or not, I don't know, but let's assume for a moment they do. They know they're large enough that they've got in-house talent, so they don't have to subcontract. But maybe to get the extra 10 points, they decide they're going to issue one little small contract to an MFD certified firm. That gives them the total 10 points.
Yeah. No, this has to be, if it's 25% of the contract.
Of the
zero.
subcontracts.
If it's 25% of the contract, they get zero. They have to do more than 25% of the contract. This, right?
Yes, that's correct.
They have to do more than the minimum that we're requiring to get the 10 points.
Dejan, did you want to give that, and we can also just, as part of the revised packet, give a little bit more detail on how this works with their, sorry.
I hear you, but it says architect submitting a response must demonstrate that at least 25% of its contracts for subcontract work.
Correct, so
if I have one,
just for threshold, but they get 0 points if they're just meeting the minimum. Beyond that, they points. Is that correct, guys?
That's correct. And that wouldn't be considered a small feat either. So the 25% is already challenging them to, as Zach mentioned, go after these MFD personnel and efforts in a more proactive manner. And then above that 25% is where they would receive points.
Yeah, they would have to subcontract more than 25%.
You're saying that this 25% threshold means 25% of the contract amount, total contract amount?
Right.
Yes.
And can you, Dejan, can you give some examples of the subcontractors that we'd be talking about here? Just because I think that will help too, in terms of what those types of subcontracts are that we saw here.
Yes, specifically for the architecture services, the subconsultants would include mechanical, electrical, structural engineers, interior design, fire protection services to start, and those would make up a significant portion of the contract amount that would allow for them to break past that threshold above 25% requirement to then receive points for that area.
All right. And let me be clear, I'm not questioning with respect to this purchase, the MFD. I'm looking at the category and how we judge it across the board. I hear you, and I just suggest maybe we look back at the wording a little bit more. I'm not convinced that I read it that way. And I just want to make sure we don't have firms who are able to get around the way we worded it and score more points than they really should to accomplish the goals that we spelled out.
Yeah, I think what would help here, because I agree with your comments, and I think what would help here is probably a slide that shows how the responding firms met it. Because I think one of the things it would help to see is, well, what are they subcontracting? Yeah. Is it printing? Is it, do they go get out?
And what components of the contract, what the percentages look like. So for what Dejan just outlined, is it 5% of the total contract, or is it potentially 40%? So that's a significant amount. And so would allow that firm, those firms to earn a significant portion of the overall contract and therefore achieve the additional 10 points.
Okay.
Yes. I agree with that, and we can definitely include that as an update.
Slide 30. Next slide, please.
Okay, now getting into the official bidders, we received 3 responsive proposals in response to RFP 2311 on the proposal deadline of April 8th, 2020 at noon. The 3 firms are listed below. KGD Architecture, also known as KGD. They are an award-winning full-service design firm headquartered in DC. They have received design accolades and excellence for environmental stewardship, addressing pressing needs in our community, including but not limited to affordable housing, mixed use, multifamily, and sustainable design, which speaks to the requirements of Wheaton Gateway. KGD also has experience on the following HOC projects, which include Elizabeth House 3 and Alexander House. The next respondent was Moya Design Partners, also known as Moya. They are a multidisciplinary boutique studio producing creative work in the fields of architecture, interior, and visual design. The firm was founded 5 years ago by designer Paolo Moya, and they are currently designing over 1,500 units in Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Durham, and DC. Their mission is to provide high quality, inclusive, accessible housing to all levels of affordability, including experience navigating complex entitlement processes. And the third respondent was Torti Gallis and Partners, also known as Torti Gallis. They were founded in 1953, and they are leading in new urbanism, a powerful force in the creation of environmentally, economically, and socially sustainable communities. They have designed quality, affordable housing communities in total over 40,000 affordable and working housing units in neighborhoods and communities throughout the country. And Tortigalis, as has been mentioned early in this presentation, has experience on the following HOC projects, which include Hillendale Gateway, Upton 2, and Metro Point. Next slide, please. This slide goes into the scoring from the scoring team in regards to the qualifications that were mentioned on the previous criteria slide. Tortigalis received the highest points at 97, and that is a pretty wide gap in regards to their ranking as #1, and then followed by Moya and then KGD. The scores below are reflected from the average of the individual scores from each member of the architectural scoring team. In regards to the first criteria, qualifications, which allowed for a total of 50 points, Tortigalis scored 47, the highest in this category, but just followed by KGD, which also showed a similar level of experience in regards to including predominantly high-rise, new construction, mixed-use, and residential projects within the area. Also achieving energy goals beyond code, which includes passive house certification for Tortigalis with their work on Hillendale Gateway. And that allowed for them to receive the highest score. And Moya here has the lowest score in this criteria because of their lack of experience in high-rise construction and mixed-use projects.
In the packet that you send to the commission, you want to make that statement because it's not clear here why they had such a low score.
Yes, we can update that as well.
This reflects, I mean, we've had submissions of recommendations before where we've had, I think, better explanation of the rationale for selecting contractors. The rationales here are not as complete as they could or should be to fully understand why you got to the scores.
Yeah, and we can add that in for the update for the commission meeting to make it more clear in regards to why Moya scored the lowest in this category.
We'd appreciate that.
Great. And in regards to the next scoring criteria, additional MFD participation, we talked.
We have milked that to death.
Yes, and all firms here, as you see, have tied in regarding to achieving the full points eligible for this criteria. We will, as discussed, update this to provide more in-depth clarification on the contract amount and as well as the direct MFD that the respondents are proposing in the next slide, but I mean in the next presentation. But all firms showed direct MFD efforts for the first consideration. And for here, Tortigalis was eligible to receive the full points because of their subcontracting plan for 36% MFD participation in regards to the contract amount, which we will update as well. And KGD and Moya are certified MFD firms, self-performing 75% and 70% of the work respectively, also making them eligible for the full points. And that is the summary of that analysis and scoring. For the references, the all firms were checked in regards to what was outlined in the RFP in regards to on-time completion, change order history, quality assurance and control in regards to oversight of the design services based on the contract documents. And they all received good references in that regard. Tortigalis has a slightly higher score and received full points in this category because of their work with HOC and the good references that they receive on Hillendale Gateway, Upton 2, and their work with Metro Point. KGD also has experience, as stated previously, with Elizabeth House 3 and Alexander House. but they were not spoken in as high regard as Tortigalis was in regards to this category. The next slide, please.
Wait a minute, you didn't have the price,
Okay.
or are you
Go
gonna
ahead.
do that on the next page?
Yes, the pricing is on the next page because we're diving a bit deep into our the analysis of the pricing. And so brief overview of the pricing here is showing the table of what was received with an asterisk at the end. And with that said, what that means is Tortigalis provided the lowest comprehensive pricing in their proposal that was reflective of the full project scope for Wheaton Gateway. And as a result, their pricing was deemed the lowest bid. Throughout this presentation, we've emphasized the importance and significance of the sustainability goals and what that means to Montgomery County and to this development and to HOC. And Passive House, as one of the sustainability targets, is integral to the design of Wheaton Gateway. For Moya specifically, they have an asterisk near their pricing because they did not provide clear direction within the RFP, clear direction within their proposal as to their Passive House design scope. We did follow up with them, and then they further failed to clearly indicate who was providing Passive House consulting services and how it was being incorporated for Wheaton Gateway. So as a result, Moya's pricing was altered. However, this pricing, we want to emphasize, does not change the overall ranking of the pricing criteria for that scoring element. The team added costs to Moya to fairly equalize their pricing to be equivalent to the scope from the other respondents that specifically address the Passive House needs and intentions for the project. As a result, Moya's score was lowered to reflect this change to their pricing of the lowest bid for the Passive House consulting services by the other bidders.
Excuse me, but I can't understand how on earth there could be a justification for the team adding costs and adjusting a bid. The bid has to stand on its submission, not adjustments that we make given some more explanation and facts. I think, where would that stop? It's a slippery slope, number one, and number two, our credibility with contractors and developers, that they know that we have changed or adjusted or manipulated, whatever word you want to use. I think it's just totally improper. And my husband was an architect, and if he were competing for proposals and knew that a competitor's bid was adjusted by the recipient, he'd never submit another offer to a response to a proposal. And I think as a public agency, it's even more egregious.
So it was really not an attempt to adjust the bid. The Passive House was a requirement, and we were trying to illustrate what the cost would
It was
be.
a requirement. And so their response or ignorance or refusal to answer that.
Okay, so understood. So what we can do and will do is to remove that assumption from the analysis, and in the packet when it comes back to the commission, and show you exactly what it looks like. We've done that outside of this, and it still doesn't change the final analysis, but we'll do that.
It didn't this time.
Sure.
But we've set a precedent here. We have acknowledged that we have made an adjustment to a bid. I just,
Except that, I think, if I'm hearing what Kayleen is saying, we haven't set a precedent yet, because the packet is being presented to committee,
that's right, to go.
and when it goes to the commission, it will not include this.
Sure.
Because
That's
we have
very
in fact, with staff concurrence, determined that that is not, in fact, advisable for us
Right.
to do for this proposal or for future proposals.
Right.
So
Right.
can I, let me ask a question, without disagreeing, I guess I'm curious, like what the alternative is. Is it if a bidder does not submit a complete bid or something, we feel like there's something missing there, do we disqualify them? Do we eliminate them? I mean, Jackie, it gets a little bit to your question before about MFD and sort of, a commitment from a bidder to achieve something that they, prospectively, if they're saying they're going to do this and they submit a bid that does not include, the full components, I guess, we either adjust it or we eliminate them. Is that what you're proposing?
What I'm proposing is that I can understand when a bid appears to be non-responsive and there's another conversation and an opportunity for the applicant to submit a refined response, and they didn't do so, they have to stand with what they submitted, and they have to acknowledge.
I mean, I guess I would argue also though that allowing a bidder to submit a refined proposal is also a slippery slope.
Well,
right? I mean, unless you're going to open it up for all all bidders to resubmit.
well, if I understand though, in the past, we've had subsequent conversations with bidders to clarify things and allowed them, all of the bidders, to adjust their responses. Have we not?
Prior to the end of the procurement,
Okay, so I guess the issue here is
after the deadline.
after the deadline is
And in this case where they were non-responsive to that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things maybe that hopefully will help. I think, yes, I think one of the questions is what do we do? And it's helpful to have this guidance and feedback so that we do set the right precedent, so that we're bringing you things that, when we get in a situation, this is how we expect to see it. I think that's extremely helpful. And so that was one of the questions that staff was confronted by. Is this non-responsive enough, unresponsive enough to warrant disqualification? Or is it, and that in itself is a subjective conversation, and it's ultimately a subjective conversation we want to be settled by you. And so what the staff decided was that here we did not want to disqualify the firm for a bunch of reasons, but and so we tried to do a couple things. One, illustrate the fact that they had been unresponsive on a particular team member. They needed to either have in-house qualifications, they did not, or they needed to show that they had hired a consultant that could, which is what we expected, frankly, given our earlier discussion. And so what we were trying to do here is illustrate what that sort of relevant cost increase would have been had they had the team member that it was a requirement they have this experience. And I think, and so I think one question is, in terms of, where the line is on disqualification. The second thing is trying to illustrate what their relative price would have been had they had this consultant on. We tried to be as fair as possible by using an actual bid or an actual cost number from another bidder and the lowest one. So trying to be fair, but also trying to show that when you see their price, know that it doesn't include X. And I think the last comment I think that's important is part of their experience number was also the lack of this consultant being on staff. And so I think there's certainly, you know, if the idea here is that, look, if you're not going to staff, if you're not going to disqualify them, you've got to basically play it as it lies, right? You got to score it as it comes in. And so was their pricing technically lower? Yes, fine. But over on the experience side, that's where they take the hit. And so that's justified. And so bringing it forward and even showing, look, as an illustrative, this is what it would look like. But that would prevent us from needing to really touch anything, just say, we're going to play it as it lies, but just commission be aware that there was this.
That explanation would have been appropriate and informational.
Sure.
Right.
And it would have explained why they lost. But for us to have inserted or changed in any way, I think that's what has the appearance of potential manipulation or favoritism or whatever the horrible things we do not want to ever do or be accused of.
Sure, and so we'll revise the analysis for the commission's consideration.
I think that when I talked about qualifications, I think we needed to explain more why you had 33 points for Moya, and very good explanation in terms of one of the primary reasons. I guess the other thing, which as you said, it's subjective. I don't know how we make the decision as to what is a responsive or non-responsive bid. The thing that I guess concerns me a little bit, I don't know how you get around it. It's not present in this particular case. But if we had another situation, if we were to award a contract to the lowest bidder who happened to leave out an element,
Right.
that contract would have to be awarded at the bid price. And we should not be increasing it to accommodate whatever the heck they left out. So how do we rationalize determining it to be responsive when in fact we can't stand signing a contract at the lower price when we know it's going to cost them more than they're getting paid?
Exactly. And I actually think that's what we were trying to, I think this is just our approach, but this is what we were trying to show is that is precisely what you're saying. And it's clear that there are other ways to present this, and we'll do it that way. But yeah, that was our concern too, is because time's linear. Like if you award these contracts and you get 90 days in and you start discovering these things, it's not costless to switch or to do something else, or there's a change order or all those things. So
I agree.
So we wanted you all to have what we needed to make the best decision, and this is good feedback on a better way to present it.
The other question related to this that I have is, under your criteria, you've got some complicated formula in terms of the reducing amounts by 2%. If a bid is 6% higher than the lowest bid. Is that new? Where did we get that from? It just sounds like over creativity to me.
Over engineering, yeah. And it also yields the, some perhaps initially eyebrow raising scoring where you have 30, 26 and nil. But Dejan, do you want to talk a little bit just about our approach on how we tried to create a rubric for this scoring?
And how does that, but when you give that explanation, how do you guard against a situation where you've got a lowball bid from some proof? You'd have to use that as base, and everybody's going to be 6% higher.
And that's a great point, because that's what the scoring team debated with in regards to Moya. They technically provided the lowest bid, but it was not comprehensive in regards to addressing the full scope of the project. And so going off of that bid to then consider the other pricing of respondents that did address the full scope as requested in the RFP, was something that was a back and forth in discussion. Specifically the language here for the pricing criteria was something that was also utilized in Hillendale. And I believe that's been reflective of the changes in the market to allow for a more competitive approach to pricing, as we've seen a lot of fluctuations recently and over the past year as well. And so that essentially any bidder that scored 15% higher than the lowest bid would automatically not be eligible for points. And that's why you have that vast range from 30, 26 to 0, in which KGD was did not only make it because they were 15% higher, but they were in fact 40% higher than Moya and 36% higher than Torty Gallus. And so that was reflected in that 0 pricing for the scoring criteria.
So what happens is it helps with outliers to the upside, and helps. And so what we should probably have in here is just a little is an illustration of that rubric, that this is really about relative pricing is really the name of the category. But the question is, how do you handle when you think you've got, an unresponsive or an incomplete, and as a result, low bid? How do you, since it's going to form the base of the whole thing, which is what the discussion about the 2% here is trying to convey, but it's difficult without an illustration to work off of. So I think adding an illustration here, showing that, and then, and then it becomes an issue of how do you, if you're going to use relative pricing, what do you do when you have a data point that may not work?
Yeah, and I don't necessarily disagree with Jackie, but I do think it is appropriate in such situations that there be some sort of penalty somewhere for a bidder that is submitting a lowball bid, or that we feel is incomplete or unresponsive in some way. It does seem like we need a way to factor that in.
Okay.
And I did want to make it clear that although with this packet, and we will revise it based on the discussion, that we are adjusting Moya's price, even with that adjustment, if we took out that adjustment and had them at the lowest bid, that would not change the ranking of the scoring, and it would not change our recommendation to move forward with.
But we need a policy for in cases where it might.
Yeah.
Right?
No, you're right.
And I would say perhaps they are non-responsive because Passive House was
It's required.
and so it's a base requirement. They don't have that capability, and it's not included, and therefore it's not priced.
Yeah.
The better way to have presented it was to have taken that response and said, this firm did not respond to a basic issue, and though they met all these other criteria, they are not responsive on a key point. And so we have had to consider them disqualified.
Yeah, so it sounds like, and this is good kind of initial, we're kind of getting started on the broader conversation. Which is great. But I think there's kind of two situations that we need to be prepared for. One where there's been an omission and we can identify it pretty clearly, like in this situation. So the good news here is it was easier to identify. The other situation I think we need to be prepared for is that situation when you just sort of don't believe the pricing, which is less of something we see in architecture, but it's often something we see in general contracting, where we just get a number and it's just
it's not achievable. And
it really doesn't work, right? But how do we express that in a way that the market can be responsive to it and it's transparent and you can't always be 100%. Some of these things are just going to be subjective, but how do we basically talk about a price that we think is just generally not realistic?
I mean, is there really the possibility of letting somebody post bid closing, revise their bid? I mean, I just, as much as you'd like to see it, I don't know how you can do that.
Right.
I mean, the other thing is if we had 10 responses, we would have dismissed this one up front.
Yeah, and I, you know, we're going,
And if you won the minority.
we're going through it well, and you know, yeah, right, exactly.
Okay, so I mean, but it's, I just think we have to, as a matter of policy, decide whether or not we are going to allow any kind of changes post final submission. And I'm not the lawyer here. We've got the lawyer and we got a procurement policy that determines those things. I just don't see how it's possible to allow a bidder to modify their proposal after we close it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we're doing it right now on another one where, and we do it often. Our procurement officer is excellent at being available for questions after the pre-bid conference. We take all questions in from, as people work through our process. Sometimes they see something that's not clear, and so they ask us questions, and where we can be, we're often very flexible about saying, oh, you know what, this is a question that everybody needs to answer, and if there's an extension to the deadline, we make that extension, and that way.
And it's available to everyone. That information is shared with them, all the bidders, and
Yes.
they all understand that there's been an extension of time
Exactly.
or whatever, because
Yes.
that's a key issue as well. Okay. So that makes me watch.
Next,
We're doing it right.
I think we're on slide 33.
33.
Civil engineering.
got a lot of
Okay.
proposals to go through.
We have moved on now to the civil engineering criteria and selection for civil engineering services as solicited under RFP 2321. This RFP was released April 13th, 2022 with a due date of May 18th, 2022. As specified in the architecture criteria, the civil engineering RFP also adhered to that same procurement process in which the RFP was posted to HOC's website and distributed to more than 300 vendors registered in Montgomery County Central Vendor Registration System, also known as CVRS. This system notifies firms applicable to respond to that solicitation that there is an RFP eligible for their review and response. A pre-proposal meeting and conference was held virtually on April 20th, 2022. 4 firms were in attendance at this conference. As also stated previously, HOC does not receive any notification whether the firms in attendance at the pre-bid conference will have an intent to submit or will submit a response to the solicitation. The scope of work outlined in RFP 2321 included a similar phasing to that of the architectural scope, 6 months of site planning preparation, 9 months of entitlement phase services, construction phase services, and construction administration services. After all the procurement dates and meetings that we identified in the first paragraph, HOC received 1 responsive proposal in response to RFP 2321 by the proposal deadline on May 18th, 2020 at noon. In accordance with HOC's procurement policy and after consulting with procurement, the minimum requirements were evaluated to bring forth a recommendation for civil engineering services. The scoring team received written instructions prior to reviewing and scoring the proposal. Another element here, similar to what was done for the architecture RFP, was we contacted the attendees at the pre-bid conference, and there seems to be a general move in the market in which there's a lack of bandwidth, in addition to the scale of the firm stated a lack of capacity as to a reason why they did not respond to the solicitation.
That is a very useful piece of information to me. In looking at these, and when people don't respond or submit, it's important that we follow up and find out why, particularly when we're left with one. Unfortunately, we have one that meets the criteria and appears to be responsible, and it's recommended by the staff, and I assume we'll support it. But it's very reassuring to me that at this point in time, the other qualified bidders self-selected themselves out of the competition due to the fact that they had a lack of capacity. They weren't promising capacity, and moving forward, they made a clear decision and were upfront about it. But I'm glad to know what the reason is, and I think the more we can find out about why people don't respond after given an opportunity, that's useful information, because many times, perhaps it's the way an RFP is articulated and presented or whatever that causes people not to do business with us. And so here we have a case where it's clear the market and their workload, they just were being upfront and not taking it on, as opposed to submitting a proposal and then giving us a crazy low bid in the hopes that maybe they'll get it, but they know they full well are not going to have to come back for change orders or whatever. So it gives me great confidence in the process you're using, and I thank you for doing that.
Great. And the minimum requirements here are outlined. We will update this slide to further elaborate on the first three criteria in regards to high residential, mixed use, and low income housing tax credit for demonstrating experience, specifically from the RFP that elaborates and includes providing satisfactory evidence of and completion of projects of similar scope for the first three categories. And then the third-party certifications, similar to the architectural, provide certifications above minimum code standards, and that aligns with the rigorous sustainability targets. And then the references, which specifically address experience in multifamily, residential, mixed-use construction in Montgomery County, Maryland, and the surrounding Baltimore, Washington metropolitan area. Next slide.
And I assume MFD was also a component, but not listed here?
Yes.
Okay, we should show that.
Okay, it's in the next slide, but yes, we can show that here as well.
It's on the slide.
I did see below, I did see here that it was mentioned, but when it's in the chart, it makes it's a little confusing that it's in one place, but not in another. And, the chart is the introduction to it, so.
Understood. Okay. This goes into what was stated in the previous slide in regards to only receiving one responsive proposal for RFP 2321 per the procurement deadline. And that respondent was Charles P. Johnson and Associates, also known as CPJ. CPJ is a full-service civil engineering firm that has provided quality engineering, land planning, surveying, and landscape architecture services to both the public and private sector since 1971. They are comprised of approximately 96 talented employees, including licensed engineers, registered landscape architects, and professional surveyors. Charles P. Johnson and Associates is a corporation organized under the state of Maryland and is headquartered in Silver Spring, Maryland. CPJ is currently working with HOC on Hillendale Gateway, which is also a high performance mixed use and LIHTC project that is achieving third-party certification standards beyond code. And this is why staff felt confident bringing forth CPJ for proposing them for civil engineering services in addition to them meeting the minimum requirements. With that, Hillendale Gateway, as said, addresses many of these minimum requirements in regards to high-rise residential, mixed use, LIHTC, third-party certifications, and HOC personnel. Speaking specifically on CPJ's experience with Hillendale Gateway, CPJ also included other projects to address this criteria to allow to present demonstrated experience in this for completed projects as well. Their MFD.
Can I ask a quick question? Just is there work on Hillendale? Have they done enough work on that for us to, for them to have enough of a track record for us to evaluate their performance at this point, or?
They have.
They do. Okay, good.
Yeah, the Hillendale has gone through site plan certification and well underway in the upfront efforts in regards to entitlement. So yes.
Great.
Okay, and addressing the MFD participation, which is something that we will update on the previous slide to incorporate this as well. CPJ's subcontracting plan included 32% MFD participation of the overall budget for the scoring. And with that, CPJ has met the minimum requirements for RFP 2321 and demonstrated the ability to provide civil engineering services for Wheaton Gateway. As a result, staff proposes the selection of CPJ to provide civil engineering services at Wheaton Gateway for $1,476,121. Next slide.
Perhaps it's a minor point that they didn't just meet the minimum. They exceeded the minimum, and I think we're choosing them, and the justification is, in spite of them being the only ones, they exceeded the minimums is a better word than met the minimum, because that implies a minimum score, and they clearly have credentials to.
That's a great point, Commissioner Simon, and the meeting the minimum is in regards to addressing the procurement policy, but then exceeding the minimum allows us the confidence to bring them forth as a recommendation as well. So that's definitely something that we would articulate.
It's an appearance.
Yes. Okay. And this slide provides a comparison for Wheaton Gateway and Hillendale Gateway in regards to them being very close, as some may call them sister projects. And not only that, but the proposal here for Torty Gallus and CPJ, they are a team that are also both working on Hillendale Gateway together, and they work well together on that. And so this table first outlines the comparison in regards to the entitlement and phasing for the projects. And here you see Wheaton Gateway is entitling 770 units, which is a 30% increase from Hillendale Gateway. But for phase one, that's more reflective of the scale of Hillendale's phase one, which is a 420 units. And to be clear, Hillendale Gateway only had one phase, and Wheaton Gateway, as we depicted in the earlier slides, does include 2 phases. Wheaton Gateway's architecture bid for Torty Gallus being the recommendation for architecture services, their bid is slightly higher, and we believe that is reflective of the scale of the project and the market changes, as it's we didn't deem it as something that was not in line with their previous bid. And this for Wheaton Gateway, civil CPJ as well, similarly, their bid here is slightly higher than what they provided for civil for Hillendale Gateway. However, we believe that's also in line with the market changes and the scale increase for Wheaton Gateway in regards to the number of units. Next slide. And Marcus, did you want to address the pre-development budget?
Sure. So obviously where we are today, there's a few years out. What we did on this slide was just to break out the potential pre-development spend over the next few years, taking us to the point where we are with Hillendale Gateway. So what you'll see is a total pre-development budget just south of 19.9 million, which there's a correction on slide 29 that the source is the PNC relock, which we do have sufficient resources for, and not the OHR. So that'll be removed for the final. But the total encompasses literally everything for the pre-development effort. So as Dejana described, it's the entitlement, it's the permitting for the first two phases, spread out between call it today 2022 through the potential financial closing in 2025. So this is just a much more easily digestible format given the bundling of services and what's going to be involved in the development effort. We go to slide 37. We actually reorganized this, but this just speaks to what Dejana described as, Wheaton versus Hillendale. Once again, three large multifamily buildings versus two. At Hillendale, 2 phases versus 1, and then you'll see that the site acreage differs, and broadly just the number of units that are being entitled.
Can we advance the slide?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there we go. Can you see now, Commissioner?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, this speaks to the prior slide that Dejana was describing in terms of not only the scale, but also just the scope of the two projects, Wheaton versus Hillendale. I think we've heard this in the past, just how you compare pre-development efforts. So this is the sort of the best illustration to kind of compare somewhat of an apples from apple with respect to the number of buildings across the site, number of phases, square footage, residential versus commercial, and then just how the budgets stack over the multi-year period.
Just a quick question, since the decisions on Hillendale preceded my time on the commission. Why is Hillendale so much smaller? Is that just based on expected market demand, or what was? It's a larger space, but it's 2/3 the size.
Yeah. So the zoning is much higher and denser for Wheaton. In addition to, so the FAR probably associated with allowable under map 7 where Wheaton is higher.
I see. Okay, thanks.
And lastly, let's go to slide 38. This is our sort of master pre-development schedule. Just once again, kind of wrapping up where we began the presentation in terms of site assemblage, the major milestones that you've seen to date, the sketch plan approval, and then where we are today with DNF, and then ultimately the July commission approval. And then, once this is recommended for approval and voted on, the next steps forward, taking us through the construction start of what we want to do. Once again, is phase 1, which is section 1 and 2 of the project. So this will be a good, look back for you as we proceed. And other milestones within, call it that purple bar, site and subdivision process. And then definitely before we get to where the permit set is that we return with some more developed drawings, similar to what we've done with Hillendale. We go to the last slide, the summary and recommendations to recap. So it's about four asks. First being approval of the calendar year 22 pre-development budget in an amount of $19,888.60, which shall be funded from the PNC relock. Approval of a loan in the amount of that amount to Wheaton Gateway LLC, and of course, in terms of the joint venture agreement. To fund ongoing pre-development costs, which includes, as described, full entitlement, site preparation phase 1, construction documents, permitting. Item 3 and 4, which are going to be procurement related matters, approval of the selection of Swarty Gallus and Partners for architectural services, and then lastly, approval the selection of Charles B. Johnson and Associates for civil engineering services.
A technical question: is it really a calendar year 22 pre-development budget? I thought the budget was extended out beyond the pre-development phase and budget extended out beyond calendar year 2022.
That's correct. So we'll clarify this since it's a multi-year pre-development budget.
I have forgotten the terms, but is our picking up the cost of, or the paying upfront the cost of pre-development part of the agreement in the joint venture?
Yes. Loan to the venture, correct. So
Yeah. No, I mean, I know in the end it all sort of
Right.
works out, but we were required under the joint venture to put up the money, the cash. Okay.
Are there any other questions? If
I'm-
no,
I would move approval.
I'll second.
it's been moved and seconded. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
And again, staff, thank you for the improvement in the visual presentation of some of this. This pre-development timeline graph is very instructional. It clarifies memory without going back through the files, and it's helpful. You're making some wonderful improvements in just the presentation and the visuals that help us as lay people in this field understand the significance of the items. That's probably why you're also getting more questions, but in the end, it's useful and instructive, and we're moving on and on. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our final agenda item is the selection of a property name for Elizabeth House 3 in accordance with HOC's naming guidelines.
So a little bit more fun.
This is an exciting,
Okay. How's that going to join me? So this will be the second. So this will be the second of the naming opportunities. As you recall, at the last commission meeting, we selected the name for what's now known as the Laureate, formerly Westside Shady Grove. Oh, sorry, the third one. Yes. So we have residents on the lane. We have the Laureate. Now we have the name we're bringing forth for our third development effort. And as discussed during the meeting for the Laureate, each development / community is going to embody its own sort of spirit and rationale behind the name. So this is the one that sort of departs from what we presented last and rather recognizes an individual and all is in accordance with the naming guidelines. So Elizabeth Square, it's a mixed income, multi-generational mixed-use development. Consists of 3 buildings. The name that we're proposing for this one, known as the Leggett, which the residential component for each would be atop the 120,000 square foot SCRAC facility. Of course, the selection of a permanent name for the property is required to support ongoing
we have
marketing.
the slides.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got it to my left. Let's go to slide 42. The horse out the gate. So Elizabeth House 3, once again, 267 units, active age restricted community, includes a replacement housing for the EH residents. Elizabeth House as a county SCRAC facility, primary care facility, and then also a Holy Cross Hospital. As mentioned, the selection of a permanent name is required to support the ongoing efforts. The proposed name, which is in alignment with the guidelines for naming of HOC properties and facilities, we're calling it the Leggett, which was vetted and subsequently approved personally, and we'd like to also say with humility by Mr. Leggett. Isaiah.
Can I just,
Typical.
one thing earlier, when you talked about it being a 267 unit for development, you don't indicate there the percentage of affordability, which is a major piece of the Leggett. I want us to be the Leggett.
All right, we will add that to the development narrative, breaking out the affordability. As shown here, Isaiah Ike Leggett was the first African American to be elected to the public office of Montgomery County Executive and the first African Americans, he elected to the county council, where he chaired the council's transportation and environmental committee and served on the education committee during his 12-year tenure as county executive, affecting all aspects of the lives of vital and vulnerable older adults of diverse backgrounds and cultures. We'll go to the next slide, please. Just showing the aerial of the master plan. One of the key elements will be the Leggett, which is under construction, pioneering senior living community and more. A place that welcomes people from surrounding neighborhoods, so state-of-the-art public aquatic rec center, promoting physical health and intergenerational activity, destination where seniors can drive within modern residences, benefit from a senior wellness center, enjoy shopping and dining nearby, surrounded by green spaces upon the full build out.
2 blocks to the metro.
2 blocks of metro.
The future football.
Yes.
And feature HOC headquarters.
That's correct.
So naming such a dynamic and progressive senior living community after I say Leggett makes perfect sense, given his service to Montgomery County. And just to note, we did have our first, we had a follow-up resident meeting on Tuesday, and I think it speaks to the residents there. It's very diverse, it's international. We had probably 4 different translators, and all the residents just seem so excited by the prospect of what's to come. So I think we could have selected a better name for a champion that just crosses all spectrum from Montgomery County.
You're absolutely right. And it fits in with Elizabeth Square as well, because it goes to historic of the commitment and the purposes and the history of the agency. So
Yes.
great all around.
In accordance with the guidelines for naming of HOC properties and facilities, we're going to be at slide 44. All right. The permanent name for a property and facility should have these principles: have a strong positive image and stand the test of time, have appropriate regard to the facility's location, geography, natural land features, and/or history, commemorate places, people, or events that are of continued importance to the town, region, state, and or nation, recognize outstanding accomplishments by an individual for the good of the community, and consider the quality of the contribution along with the length of service by the individual. I think if we go through the subsequent slides, we see that we've checked all the boxes.
Absolutely.
With this facility. I won't narrate all of his accomplishments, but I think it's worth noting on the next slide, some of which he's accomplished. Slide 45. Where do we begin? Many claim that one of his most noteworthy accomplishments was protecting the county's long-term finances after the Great Recession of 2008. Thanks to his efforts, the county ultimately increases reserves from $79 million to $500 million and protected its AAA bond rating. Mr. Leggett relocated county facilities, paved the way for burst of development activity in Shady Grove, which is where the Laureate is located. He launched nearly 60 major public infrastructure projects during his 12 years in office, and he also converted the county's economic development entity from a public department to one led by the private sector. I think also just under his leadership, Montgomery County's expanded affordable housing funding, added programs for immigrants, increased the minimum wage, and created a program to hire people with disabilities. Once again, if I could throw the triple bottom line, he's not only met that in his tenure with Montgomery County, HOC is doing it. So I think that graphic of people, profit, environment, all speak to Mr. Leggett's legacy of what he's done. Let's see, the next slide, 46, we summarize here how he's invested greatly in senior programs. There's several things, all of which are excellent. He's let's see, we've got 17 senior housing projects. I'll change that to communities. Were initiated and when complete, a total of 2,100 rental units, including approximately 1,700 units affordable for seniors, will be preserved or created. Several transportation programs were enhanced, such as extended free bus hours for seniors, people with disabilities, and also with the Call and Ride program as well. So once again, many of accolades to celebrate. As we get to the end, just awards and recognitions. He was named the Washingtonian of the Year by Washington Magazine. Received hundreds of honors and awards throughout the county and state. He served on several boards throughout the county, all of which are identified here. But, most importantly, we think, just to reiterate, that he's made a significant impact on the life of all residents of Montgomery County, especially the senior community, people with disabilities, and low-income families. The programs he created or enhanced will provide much-needed services to those who need them the most. So fittingly, staff are proud to propose the permanent name of our newest premier mixed-income housing community, the Lake. So,
I'd like to say thank you for what I think is a good description of the justification for it. And I would gladly move that we send this recommendation to the commission for approval.
Is there a second?
I don't oppose this naming at all. However, we've talked about the risks of naming things after individuals, and in my mind, one way of mitigating that is not doing it for the living or for someone who hasn't been out of public life for an extensive period of time. So I'll be abstaining on this. Like I said, I don't oppose it, but I'm choosing to abstain.
All right, you can second.
Well, I will second the motion. I wholeheartedly approve it. I have been concerned about living persons. I have been concerned about length of time or breadth of things, but I think this checks all the boxes, and the county and its people are clearly indebted to Ike for many of the qualities and benefits of life that we enjoy here, and enthusiastically second it and call for the question.
I'd like to just respond to Jeffrey. I concur with the concerns that you've expressed in terms of naming it after individuals. I'm not the biggest supporter of that either. I do happen to think that this is an exception. I think we ought to make it clear that this is not setting a precedent for HOC.
Yes.
Either in terms of naming a community after a living person, or in terms of naming a community after a person, or no matter what their background. I think that the staff has gone through a lot of things in terms of justifying it, and I clearly am supportive. But I do acknowledge the concerns that you've expressed, Jeffrey, and I think that we need to make it clear that this is not, it should not be considered precedent setting.
I would concur with that as well. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye. And the motion is passed. And
Abstentions.
and an abstention. So the motion recommendation will go forward to the full commission. And thank you. This has been a very important meeting, I think, in communication, and it bodes well for all the things that are to come. So thank you.
Thank you.
We're adjourned.